So what we're going to do today is take a look at the difference between cutting with a cutting torch and cutting with the plasma cutter. So the cutting torch, as we already learned, we use the fuel to heat and then the oxygen to do the cutting. We use the cutting torch head on the torch welding handle. And then this is the school's plasma cutter. It's pretty small and it's pretty powerful. You don't really need one much bigger than this. And this one's actually quite old now. You can get them even smaller than this. They're like lunchbox sized, and they're perfectly fine for cutting through just about anything in the body shop because we don't get into stuff that's so thick, right? So how they work is they use an electric arc to superheat the ions in the compressed air going in the back to create plasma to melt and cut through the steel, right? So you can see I have the shop air plugged into the back. A lot of plasma cutters have a little filter separator inside because they need very clean air. There can't be moisture, dirt, oil, or anything in it. It messes up the machine and it messes up your cut too, right? And luckily at the school we have very clean, very dry air anyway, so there's never anything in that little filter. This is the regulator on the top to tell you what the pressure is up at the front. And then we have a power switch. We have an air check tester to check the solenoid. This is a thermal over protection. There, that little light if it comes on because you're cutting for too long, you've exceeded the duty cycle. And then this is the amp control for how much current you want, depending on how thick of metal you want. And I haven't referenced the manual to this. I haven't used it in years, but I turned it on, and this is what it's set to. We got about 50 psi. It's turned up to 15 amps. And I changed the tips in it, and it seems to be cutting the 20 gauge sheet metal very well, right? And then our trusty oxyacetylene, got a 5 and 10. The cutting torch on to slice away. So we'll cut some metal and see what the difference is. We'll do the oxy fuel cutting first. And this is the difference between the two. So the oxy fuel cutting, which I was kind of shaky hand cutting, holding the camera with one and cutting with the other. So it wasn't perfect, but you can see how wide the heat score is and how all the slag didn't get blown out. I had the oxygen turned all the way out. It was set to 10. But it's not like I'm super practiced up on this. It probably could have been done better. Both of them I was cutting following the guide, just a piece of sheet metal to make it straighter. And you can see it very quickly and easily melts and cuts through the sheet metal, but with a lot of heat distortion. And it's why you're not allowed to oxy fuel cut a car you're repairing anymore. Basically, the torches in a body shop are used for heating up stuff or chopping stuff that's going to be discarded, right? Because the metal is destroyed. If you cut this for, say, a sectioning procedure, you would then have to cut back like probably 2 or 3 inches away from the cut mark to get out of the heat affected zone where the metal's tempered and the strength of any sort of high strength steel is destroyed, plus the warping that would occur, right? Okay, then if we look at the plasma, you can see how tiny the heat score is, and then how clean the cut is, and also how fast that cut was, right? And again, I'm not super practiced up with the plasma cutter either. I'm just kind of winging it for the video, but you can see why a lot of people invest in a plasma cutter, because this would just have to be ground a little bit. Like, it's only about, the heat effect zone is only a couple of millimeters. So you could actually cut parts that are going to stay on the car or go back on the car without too much problem. One of the problems with plasma cutter is you saw all the sparks, and I had to put the camera in my welding helmet to view it, because when you're looking at literally a lightning bolt, it's kind of bright, whereas the cutting torch is just a flame that you're looking at a fire. The sparks are pretty out of control, right? So you can't do a lot of cutting on an actual vehicle with the plasma cutter anyhow, because you're going to set foam, interior, plastic, rust proofing, all kinds of stuff on fire. It's just a little too spicy in the body shop. So you have to be very, very careful with it. But look at how nice it works. It's a beautiful machine. That's why I have one at home. I use it all the time because it is so quick, so fast, and so easy. And the consumables on it, once you get used to using it, last a very, very long time. And it's, after the initial cost of buying an expensive plasma cutter, which aren't so expensive anymore, you don't want to be buying like, $2, $3 zip discs and cut off blades and sawzall blades and air saw blades, and they just add up like crazy. When your boss is buying them, it really doesn't matter, but when you're buying them, they are quite expensive. And the plasma, like, you can run, I don't know, like once you get used to using it, you could probably cut like 50 feet of metal on a tip without any too much problem. So when you start getting into weird little areas where you're getting blowback, that you start to burn through consumables, but they're not particularly expensive either. This is a typical consumables kit. It's the one for our ESAB unit at the school. It tells you all the little parts that are replaceable. Little ceramic plunger right here. They last an extremely long time. I don't know if we ever really have to change those unless they get lost when you take it apart. This thing is the swirl baffle. It's another little piece of ceramic. This one's pink. These last an extremely long time too. Rarely have to be changed until you drop it and you can't find it. The parts that take the big wear are the electrode up here, which is this guy, this electrode. When they're worn and nasty, you can see how the plasma, the lightning bolt, swirls around the end of it, and then the end starts to get really pitted and messed up, and then you get sort of an unstable arc. You can't do a nice clean line. And then the nozzle, which is the highest wear item, it wears out the most, is this little guy here, and you can see we got a whole bunch of them. And this is like a decently worn one. Like if you were just rough cutting or wrecking something, this one actually still works, but the arc was coming out a little sideways, so I changed it for a fresh one. So the nozzle gets used the most. The electrode sees a lot of wear. The baffle, they do get worn over time when you're really nasty to them, but they last quite a long time. And then the heat shield, which is ceramic again, they usually crack. That's what usually happens to them from dropping it or from dragging it on the workpiece and overheating like one portion of it, and a new one of those, right? So they come in little kits. My plasma cutter is a Hypertherm, I think it is, or maybe it's a Thermal Dynamics. I might show it to you guys. It's a little bit different, but does the exact same thing. And the consumables are quite inexpensive. Like the little kit like this is maybe like $100, and it'll keep you going for like years. So they are awesome tools, and have definite advantages to the oxyacetylene torch, right? The only real downfall is you can't heat bolts and stuff that's stuck. With the torches you can, right? So I mean, most shops that have a plasma cutter have a set of torches too. So yeah, that's it.